front of the front. Let's start, of course, with Pokrovsk. Here, the American Institute for the Study of War reports that Ukrainian forces have managed to slow down the enemy's advance near Pokrovsk. According to your information, what is happening in this area right now?
Yeah. The Ukrainian Defense Forces are managing to keep the situation under control in Pokrovsk and in the Pokrovsk direction. We're talking about the Pokrovsk agglomeration, which includes, accordingly, Mirnohrad and Dobropillia. Let's start with the Pokrovsk direction. The Ukrainian Defense Forces have largely managed to stabilize the situation in the Rodynske area. Rodynske is a key settlement and a logistical hub for the Ukrainian Defense Forces. Let me remind you, Rodynske is traversed by the only paved road, which is used for personnel rotation, ammunition supply, and evacuation of the wounded. This is how logistical and technical support for the Ukrainian Defense Forces units is provided both in Mirnohrad and in Pokrovsk. Therefore, the significance of this settlement is crucial both for the Ukrainian Defense Forces and, accordingly, for the Russian occupation army. In addition, according to Russian sources themselves, the Ukrainian Defense Forces have achieved tactical successes in the so-called Dobropillia salient of the occupiers. This is in the area of Shakhove. The Ukrainian Defense Forces have carried out a series of successful counterattacks and have significantly improved their tactical positions. And control over Shakhove means control over the logistics of the occupying forces, and accordingly further tactical successes in this direction make it possible to talk about the potential for an operational encirclement of Russian groups in the Dobropillia direction. Regarding Pokrovsk, the situation in Pokrovsk is difficult. The occupiers are trying to push the Ukrainian Defense Forces out of this settlement. But I should note, they are pushing them out. In other words, there is a change in the tactics and strategy of the occupying forces' actions. There is no talk of any operational encirclement. Even the Russian occupiers themselves admit this. In particular, the Russian Z-blogger Kalashnikov says that there is no talk of encircling Pokrovsk. And at the moment, the occupiers are using the same tactics of street fighting as they did during the battles for Bakhmut, suffering colossal losses in personnel. At the moment, according to both the Ukrainian side and accordingly the Russian side, the situation in the area of the so-called prospect is being clarified. This is the city center, where, according to information from the Russian side, I should note, Ukraine's defense forces have carried out a number of successful counterattacks. So at the moment, the situation is being clarified. Regarding Pokrovsk, the main fighting has unfolded in the area of the Dinas neighborhood, which you are showing right now. In addition, at the moment, Ukraine's defense forces are holding the area of the high-rise buildings under control, which allows us to provide locations for our units and accordingly to keep the positions of the occupying forces under fire control. The situation is difficult, but I want to emphasize once again, Ukraine's defense forces are holding the Pokrovsk direction, and the Pokrovsk direction is, above all, not so much of military as of political significance. Holding the Pokrovsk direction increases the Ukrainian side's agency in the negotiation process, essentially nullifying all Russian claims about the possibility of capturing the Donetsk region by military means. Moreover, I would note what is happening now in Pokrovsk is completely disrupting the Russian side's plans. All of Gerasimov's triumphant statements about capturing Pokrovsk have turned out to be nothing more than a bluff, just an informational pretext. Moreover, as a direct result of the recent meeting of the General Staff of the occupying country's army, which was convened specifically to address the ongoing events in Pokrovsk, truly unprecedented personnel decisions were made. Namely, these included the official dismissal of the commander of the 51st Combined Arms Army of the occupying country, Lieutenant General Melchakov. Moreover, the official reason given was loss of personnel and failure to carry out orders from higher command, specifically the capture of Pokrovsk and Mirnohrad. This is more than clear evidence that the occupiers' plans for Pokrovsk, and not just Pokrovsk, but also for Kupiansk, the Kostiantynivka area, and accordingly the Lyman direction, have failed.
I want to discuss yet another fake from Russian propaganda, and in particular, it's not just Russian propaganda. This comes from the mouth of a person who calls himself the president of a country. These fakes are being spread. Yesterday's statement by Putin. He said something there, got a little too carried away with his fantasies. But at the same time, I'll state the essence, actually, of the facts that we want to refute. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine has refuted that very lie from the chief of the Russian General Staff, Gerasimov, in his report to Putin about the capture of Ukrainian cities in the Kharkiv and Donetsk regions. Kupiansk is under the control of Ukraine's defense forces. There you go. This is the only truth that exists today and at this moment. Russian saboteurs are being identified and, moreover, eliminated there, as clarified by the General Staff. A similar situation is happening in Yampol as well. Gerasimov's statements about the alleged capture of 80% of Vovchansk and 70% of Pokrovsk have also turned out to be false, as you have just mentioned. As noted by the Ukrainian General Staff, and to confirm your words, I'll add that in Pokrovsk, the elimination of enemy forces in the urban area is ongoing. And, we very often lately have been facing situations where we simply have to debunk the fakes that Russian propaganda keeps spreading. But at the same time, let's also discuss the situation in Kupiansk and in Yampol. I understand that the situation there is difficult in any case, but I think it's absolutely not what the Russian dictator claimed once again.
It's absolutely not the case. Moreover, the statements made by both Gerasimov and the Russian dictator are being questioned by Russian public channels themselves. It's noted that Gerasimov's previous statements about encircling 18 battalions of Ukraine's defense forces in Kupiansk were already, at the very least, not true. And now they're mentioning a number of more than 25. Moreover, Russian public channels are asking, so where did the previous 18 battalions go? Maybe they retreated to Kupiansk-Uzlovoy, maybe they vanished, or maybe they never existed at all. This, accordingly, is what they call putting the cart before the horse. In other words, they're presenting possible scenarios for how things might develop in Kupiansk. The situation in Kupiansk is more predictable than in Pokrovsk. Thanks to the redeployment of operational reserves by Ukraine's defense forces, they managed to cut off the Russian occupiers' assault groups in Kupiansk from ground-based locations that would allow for logistical and technical support of these units. In other words, what this means is that the so-called Russian assault groups are currently being supplied exclusively by heavy drones. And accordingly, there is absolutely no reason to talk about the possibility of taking Kupiansk when the assault units themselves are effectively in an operational encirclement by Ukrainian forces. The occupiers are using the so-called infiltration tactic, sending in groups of 2 or 3 people, as well as the so-called flag planting tactic. So this group runs in, taking advantage of the urban environment and the absence of an actual line of contact, and plants a flag. This is filmed and then presented as if it were already a zone under the control of the occupying army. But then, accordingly, both this group and the Russian Aquafresh are targeted by Ukrainian defense forces using FPV drones, strike weapons, and both tube and rocket artillery. And that's where the Russians' tactical successes end. Regarding Yampol, yes, there has been an intensification of combat operations. Moreover, the occupiers are trying to break through in several directions at once towards Lyman, Yampol, and Siversk. And I would like to note that the intensification of hostilities which we are currently witnessing coincides in time with the appearance in the media of the American plan to end the ongoing war, as well as the unprecedented pressure exerted by the United States primarily on the Russian Federation. The Russians are trying to use this time crunch to demonstrate accordingly tactical successes or to try to consolidate certain territorial gains by taking advantage of their numerical superiority. But I want to emphasize again, there are no tactical successes. Both Kupiansk, Vovchansk, and a significant territory remain under the control of Ukraine's defense forces. And I want to emphasize once again, the statements from the Russian side are first and foremost not even addressed to the American partners, who understand the situation on the front line perfectly well. They are aimed at the domestic audience. In this way, they are shaping public opinion within the Russian Federation. But it is also quite telling that the State Duma of the Russian Federation failed to pass a bill to increase funding for the material and technical support of Russian army conscripts. The wording, there is no money. This is quite telling.
Dmitry, well, indeed, here we are in complete agreement with you. Of course, this is mainly aimed only at the domestic audience because, well, they have to tell their own people something, especially when, even according to official statistics, more than a third of the population openly admits that they don't have enough money for even the most basic food products. And the situation will get worse, because starting next year, their VAT will change. It will increase, of course, not decrease, which means prices will soar even higher. And it will be even more necessary to appease this domestic audience so that sooner or later these people don't end up out on the streets protesting. Dmitry, thank you so much for